Hi everyone. Today I've prepared an interesting experiment for you. In this container, there's egg white. In this one, there's glycol, which is used in cosmetics as a viscosity reducer. Here, there's water, and in this one, oil. I added a few drops of betadine, and thanks to the betadine, I was able to color both the water and the glycol. The oil already has this color naturally. Here, I've prepared a jar with the bottom broken off, so you can pour things in from the top. And I attach this tube to the bottom of the jar. And when I lift this tube, the height of the liquid in the tube should theoretically match the height of the liquid here in the jar. You can find these liquids in our everyday lives. One of them is supposedly, and I really want to emphasize supposedly here, a superliquid, namely this glycol that's in this container. What you need to know about superliquids is that they display properties you wouldn't expect from a liquid, namely it has zero viscosity. Zero viscosity was discovered around 1930, specifically in the fourth isotope of helium, where they found superfluidity. They even received a Nobel Prize for it at the time. Later, further experiments were conducted, and in 1996, this superfluidity phenomenon was also discovered in the third isotope of helium, and the participants received a Nobel Prize for that as well. Helium is capable of this, specifically the third and fourth isotopes, and around 2 Kelvin, so much so that it can even move upward, even up a slope, meaning it could overcome gravity. The helium experiment looks like this. You need a container with liquid helium, cooled down to about 2 Kelvin. Regular helium isn't enough. You need the third or fourth isotope. And if I were to dip, say, this jar into the helium, so here's the level of the helium, I dip it in, and here would be the level of the helium would climb up the wall of the jar and flow into the jar, covering the inside as well. If I lift it out, the helium climbs up the wall and flows back, or more precisely, returns to the original container. You could even do an interesting experiment, namely a perpetual motion machine, like in many of my videos. It would work like this. You would pour the superfluid in here, and it would start to drip down into the tube. So I would lift the tube, and as I mentioned, superfluids are so viscous that they can even move upwards. I would place it above the container. I'm showing it like this now. I wouldn't put the end into the container, and basically the superfluid would drip out from here, forming a circular chain. So it would continuously, cyclically, and automatically circulate without any kind of pump. I looked into what it takes to have such a superfluid. One solution is that I would need a neutron star, which has about half the mass of the Sun, roughly 30 kilometers in diameter, spinning around its axis at about 1/10 the speed of light at its surface. Unfortunately, I don't have a neutron star like that. My wife would definitely freak out if I had a neutron star here in my workshop. And even if I did have one, I'd be flattened like a pancake, burned up. A lot of things would happen. I'd be torn apart down to my atoms. On the surface of neutron stars, you could find these kinds of superfluids. Of course, the other option would be if I had helium-3 or helium-4 isotopes and I could cool this stuff, well, more precisely, this material, the helium, down to 2 Kelvin. Then it would become a superfluid and you could do all sorts of interesting experiments with it, even at 2 Kelvin. My knowledge basically ends at the point where, say, you need to get the freezer or the fridge down to minus 20 degrees Celsius, so I can't really make anything much colder than that at home. Sure, you could maybe get a bit colder by evaporating 1 or 2 substances, but getting down to 2 Kelvin is absolutely out of the question. However, you can find plenty of videos online showing simple substances behaving like superfluids, that is, for example, being able to flow upwards. And if any of these liquids could actually flow upwards, then we would have just created a perpetual motion machine. If that worked, we'd immediately overturn the second law of thermodynamics, and Pascal's law would go out the window too. But of course, that's not going to happen because this is the kind of video where I'll show you that one of the fluids will actually behave like a superfluid. But I'm also going to show you where the trick is, where the deception lies. A lot of people don't reveal these tricks online, so it seems like one of the fluids has some special property, but it really doesn't. There's just a little trick, a small twist involved. Egg white is a very special fluid. Its molecules form very long chains, and as you can see, I'm going to try pouring it out of this container. If I carefully pour the egg white from this container into this empty jar, you'll notice that the egg white almost magically pulls itself from one vessel to the other. So now I'm going to gently tilt the container just enough for a few drops to start coming out. And I want you to watch closely. One part of the egg white actually drags the rest of it along with it. It's moving, and you can see that a part of the egg white has pulled the rest with it. But this isn't what we'll be experimenting with next, so stay tuned for the next step. I'm taking the cap off the container with water. And here you can see the water level, which is at the same height as the level inside the container. If I were skilled enough and could quickly attach this tube here, then if the liquid started to flow here, a kind of circulation would begin, and I'd have a perpetual motion machine. Of course, for that to happen, this would have to be a super liquid, which it probably isn't. Or I've lowered the tube. This water level here is always at exactly the same height, no matter what. If I block the end of this tube with my finger, I can actually raise the water level inside the tube. I want to put it in here, but only a drop or two came out, and the liquid level in the tube immediately flowed back down, and now it's here again, exactly at the same height as the water in the container, just as before. I'm going to pour the oil into this container now. You can see the oil behaves in a completely different way compared to the water. And it does not act the same at all, which is quite interesting compared to water. In the previous experiment, when water got into the tube, it basically flowed out the end of the tube by the time I poured the water into the container. This process happens much more slowly with oil. I lift the end of the tube like this. Its height matches the height of the oil in the container. If I lift the tube, I don't even need to block the end of it. For a moment, the oil level rises here as well. And if I lower it, the level drops compared to the other side. Because the liquid here isn't viscous enough, so it's relatively thick. But with this, I might have a chance to do the experiment I mentioned. The circulation hasn't started. And this still isn't a perpetual motion machine. For the glycol you see in this container, I made a separate apparatus. In the past few minutes, we've basically been talking about communicating vessels. I put a homogeneous liquid into a tube, water, and also a different oil. Basically, this now represents the tube I used earlier. At one end of the tube was the reservoir, and with its help I filled in the liquid. And at the other end of the tube, the liquid level rose to the same height as the water or the other oil in the jars. The point of communicating vessels is that the air pressure above both branches of the tube is the same. The liquid inside is homogeneous, it's connected, and it's thick enough. If it were very thin, then the capillary, because of the capillary effect, the liquid could possibly rise higher in one branch, but that's not the case here. This tube has an 8 millimeter diameter, so it's thick enough, and we're not talking about any capillary effects here. At least not with water. And I have a deodorant bottle, a glass bottle. If you look at it, you can see it's completely empty. The tube comes down nicely here to the grate. I put the grate here so you can see that, in reality, there's nothing. I use a cable tie to securely fasten the end of the tube, making sure it is positioned about 1 centimeter higher than before, or to keep it firmly in place. Then I carefully pour in the soda, and I would expect the soda level to rise to about this point right here. The soda is foaming a bit, so I'll gently skim the top with a stick to remove the excess foam. Looks like I do need the other cable tie after all to keep everything stable. The tube is positioned even higher up than the level of the soda at the end, and the end of the tube droops down a little here, so the drips and drops of soda don't run down the side of the tube, but instead drip back into the container. Unfortunately, my container is leaking a bit here, so I'll add a little more soda to compensate for the loss. As you can see, the end of the tube is now positioned higher up, and the soda flows gently back from the end of the tube into the container, rather than spilling out. You can see the whole system in front of you, laid out clearly. If this experiment were actually true, then the usual laws and scientific descriptions that we rely on wouldn't apply in this case. But there's a trick hidden in this experiment, and I'll show you exactly where the trick is located. The trick is that if I turn this container like this, you'll notice that the whole thing stops moving. The key is right there. See, I had previously built a pump into this device, which is an important feature. The pump itself is installed in the lower part of the cap, right at the bottom section. It's no coincidence that I showed the cap falling in the video earlier. This was intentional to demonstrate how it works. Now I'll remove the fasteners, which are holding everything securely in place. Listen carefully. This is the sound of the pump operating, and you can actually adjust the pump by turning the container like this. This is how the pump is positioned when you turn it in this particular way, allowing for precise control over its function. Then the pump starts running. I built a small but powerful magnet into this flexible rubber ring, specifically a very tiny little magnet right here. And in this cap, I carefully installed both a miniature pump and a sensitive reed relay. As I showed you the assembly process earlier, now I'll show you the disassembly as well. There's still absolutely nothing inside here, and here's a small lithium-ion battery for power. Behind the lithium-ion battery, there's a little vibration motor, which was actually taken from a mobile phone, and it fits perfectly in this compact space. Motor, the one that makes the phone vibrate when you get a call. I removed the little unbalanced part that causes the vibration, and instead, I attached a small propeller to it. The scientists are the ones who actually have access to these materials and equipment. At home, you can only make these kinds of trick or demonstration videos, such as showing how to make these clever self-circulating systems from detergent or other household things. You can see here as well, the end of the tube is positioned higher, and the liquid keeps dripping continuously from the tube, just as before. So thank you all very much for your attention and for watching. I'm glad you watched my video. Please subscribe to my channel. Thank you. Bye.